how do we deal with this, tsunami of what look like qualified applicants, and how do we find the people that are really going to be the right fit for the role and the right fit for our team?
What's the cheat code on figuring that out?
The message that you want to send in essence is, I know who you are as a company.
Hello. You're tuning into the Careering with Cameron podcast, your safe place to ask all the dumb questions about finding a job. Hey everybody, it's Kevin Cameron with Careering with Cameron, and I have the pleasure of being joined today by Lili Foggle. Lili is going to help us with one of the things we're hearing an awful lot about, which is not necessarily being ready for an interview. And even more important, how do you really get ready for an interview to stand out and not get to that final phase of your job search and not get the job because you weren't prepared, weren't ready for questions, or frankly, you weren't ready to ask the questions you should be asking. Lili's going to help us with what those questions may be. Welcome, Lili. Good to see you here.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Thanks for inviting me. Always happy to talk about interviews.
Absolutely. So we had a chat about a week ago, and I really enjoyed learning more in terms of how you're working with people to get them ready for the interview process. Tell us a little bit about your firm and background in terms of how you got to this point.
Sure. My company is Impressive Interviewing, and for the last 10 years, I've been preparing my clients one-on-one for their job interviews in every industry you can imagine, from architect to zookeepers and everything in between, finance, tech, healthcare, and everything from entry level all the way up to C-suite roles. Because my specialty, my niche, is I teach communication skills, right? So I'm not about the technical interview. That's not the kind of thing I prepare for. I'm all about nailing and being the number one choice for the behavioral interview, because, unlike resume writers, they write a resume. Their goal is, I'm going to help my client get the interview, get their foot in the door, right? Same with LinkedIn bios and all that. But if my client is not the number one choice, a silver medal in interviewing is still a rejection letter. So the goal is not only to be able to articulate your value and articulate your fit, but to do it in a way that it's so compelling that the hiring manager just says, I want that candidate. So that's the goal. That's what I've been doing for 10 years. I've worked with different organizations. I've done some work with the Navy Transition Assistance Program, helping folks coming out of the military. I've done some work with refugees in a city near me. And more recently, I took a position as the director of the Interview Institute at the Professional Association of Resume Writers and Career Coaches. And there I train other interview coaches. So I run their interview coaching certification program. But my passion is teaching people the skills to be able to articulate what it is they are great at in a way that they feel confident and they believe what they are saying, and it's natural, right? I'm not about memorizing scripts. I want people to be able to have a natural conversation about how great they are.
I love that. We spend so much time trying to get somebody's attention to have an interview. And it is gut-wrenching when you go through that process and you're prepared, air quotes, for the interview, and you don't get the job.
Yeah. I'm going to tell you what also is gut-wrenching and what's brutal right now is even getting to the interview, Kevin, because right now the application to interview rate is about 3%. About 3% of the people who apply actually land an interview. Yep. And I can tell you, I see my clients, they're feeling it. When I started this 10 years ago, clients would come to me and they would say, I've got 5 or 6 interviews lined up and I want some help preparing. And now I'm much more likely to get, I've got one interview. It took me 4 months to get this interview. It took me 300 applications to get this interview. The stakes are just so much higher. And a lot of that has everything to do with what we call the AI recruiting doom loop. The fact that candidates are using AI to kind of get their foot in the door, and companies are getting flooded with these AI generated resumes. And so they're using AI, and that's where we get into the AI interviews and the AI assessed interviews and asynchronous AI assessed interviews, because they're trying to figure out, how do we deal with this tsunami of what look like qualified applicants, and how do we find the people that are really going to be the right fit for the role and the right fit for our team? So there's a whole AI portion of the recruiting funnel now that's annoying everybody. It's frustrating candidates because they can't get through to get an interview. And it's frustrating companies because they're having a hard time getting the right people for the roles. So it is gut wrenching, and it is brutal right now.
Yep. And keeping up with the flow. I mean, I use the analogy quite a bit that it used to be it took several steps to submit a resume for a position. Now you can have a disagreement with somebody at work at lunch and apply to 7 jobs before you're back in the building. Unfortunately, it's a very easy, fast process. And that doesn't mean that those submittals are actual applicants. They're just people who were upset one day. And they may or may not even return the phone call.
Or more likely, there are people who are using these AI platforms like Lazy Apply, Easy Apply, AI Apply, that, you answer a couple of questions, you upload your resume, and while you sleep, they apply you to 500 jobs, most of which you probably have no interest in at all, but all of which are further making it, creating all that noise that makes it hard for someone to actually land an interview for a position they're right for.
Yeah, and you have absolutely no control over who your resume has landed with. So you're walking into situations where they may have a different version altogether. So yes, we can go down that road all day long in terms of AI and what it's doing to the recruitment process. True or false?
I like this game.
True or false? When you're in the position of looking for an opportunity, the most important thing, right, is that you have the skills for the job. That's what they're going to pick, right?
Well, true. You won't get to the part of the interview where other things matter if you don't have that first.
True.
Because as I said, the beginning of the hiring funnel is all about, does this person actually have our non-negotiables, the things we absolutely must have. So if you don't have those, you're not getting to the next stage where you can show them what else you have.
Yep. What helps them to make the actual decision, though?
Now I just want to clarify what you're asking me. Are you asking me that when it gets to that final round, like you've gotten through and it's down to the final 3 candidates, is it still the skills? No.
Correct.
That's when things shift, right?
Yes.
That's when things shift. So the first part of the hiring funnel, the first part of the interview funnel is going to be all about, are your skills valid? Are they valid for what we need? Can you produce results? Do you have the value we're looking for? The experience, the knowledge, the skills, the ability, the attitude. But once you get to that final round and you've down to the final 3, they all have that. They all can do the job. They all have the experience. And then the decision shifts. First of all, it shifts in terms of who's making the decision. We're no longer in the hands of the recruiter anymore, right? We're no longer in the hands of HR. We are now talking probably with the hiring manager or a level above. And it shifts to judgment. It shifts to likability. It shifts to, do I trust this person? Will I be able to trust them on my team? Do I trust how they're going to show up in a team, with other people, with our clients? It's about trust. It's about judgment. And it's about likability when you get to that final round. And it's also very, very, very much about fit. And when I say fit, Kevin, I don't mean fit the way recruiters and resume writers use fit, right? When recruiters talk about fit, they mean fit for the role. Again, do you have all the things we're looking for? When I talk about fit from an interviewing perspective, I mean fit for the team, alignment with the team's mission, alignment with the values that unite and motivate their team. And there's a really great reason why that's so important. And it's the thing that most people miss when they're preparing for an interview, because it requires a lot of research to be able to articulate a compelling and believable fit proposition. But the reason why it's so important to take the time to do that is there have been a ton of studies show. So turnover is a huge problem for companies. It's super expensive. Right now, companies are really struggling, as we just talked about, to find people to fill the roles to begin with. It costs over $42,000 per employee on average to replace an employee, or anywhere from 6 months to 24 months of that employee's salary, and turnover is high. Right? I saw some Gallup poll that said more than 51% of US workers are looking for another job, even if they're in a job. So reducing turnover and increasing retention is an important part of hiring someone who's going to stay. Now, how does someone in that candidate role convince them that this is the place for me and I'm going to stay? The biggest factor that indicates whether someone is going to be a successful employee long-term is alignment with the values that unite and motivate the team. Because when that alignment exists, when I care about the same mission and things and values that the rest of my team care about, I'm happier. And studies, so many studies, happier, perform better, more successful, more likely to stay. And the converse is true. If I don't care about the mission, if I don't feel in my soul the values that the team is so excited about of collaboration, innovation, whatever they are, I'm not working so hard. I've got an eye out for something else. I'm probably going to bring a little negativity into work because I'm not so happy. And the minute something better comes along, I'm out of there. So hiring for that fit is super important. And where that comes into play is that final round, because everybody's got the value. Everyone can do the job. Who's the most intrinsically motivated to really want to be on this team doing this work? Because that's going to be the employee that won't leave. So creating that message is a really important thing.
What's the cheat code on figuring that out? Tell us the cheat code. Give us a secret, Lily. Give us a secret.
Easy. There is a cheat code, and it's research, and alignment, right? So it means coming in there, first of all, the message that you want to send in essence is, I know who you are as a company. I know what makes you different from other companies like you. I know the values that unite and motivate your team, and I am motivated by those same values. That's why I would be a great fit. You can't do that if you haven't researched what the mission and those values are. You can't do that if you aren't able to talk about the company and what they care about, like you've done some deep research. And what really sends the message in a powerful way is when you start dropping into your answer, why do you want to work for us? When you drop into that answer, details about things that you've researched that no other candidate is bringing up, right? So this is why I tell my clients, listen, let's first identify what are the values of that team that make you excited to work there. Like, let's go first find what their values are. And that can be a little difficult sometimes, because sometimes companies put something saying, these are our 5 core values. And sometimes those are the core values. And sometimes that's marketing and branding.
Exactly.
So sometimes you got to look under the hood. And what I mean by that is, who's the leadership? What are they writing? What are they posting on LinkedIn? What letters have they written? What articles have they written? What are they saying in podcast interviews? That's where you're going to see what the real values of the team are. And when you're sitting in that interview and it's the final round and they say, why do you want to work for us? And you say, well, one of the things that I'm really impressed with is your commitment to accessibility of your product for everybody. And I was listening to a podcast that your CEO gave, and right away they're going, you listen to a podcast that our CEO gave?
Yes, exactly.
Right. Like, who does that? Who takes the time unless you really want this job and you really care and you're highly motivated, not for a job, but for this job. So that's the level of research I'm talking about.
So what about in that research process? You're a candidate coming through the process to get prepared for an interview. And I think, we tend to get so focused on, I have to get the job, right? And they're prepared and they're ready. But what about also paying attention to that? This might not be for me. This might not be what I thought it was. What do we do in that situation also?
So you bring up a really good point, but you have to understand the perspective that I bring to this question, right? Because I'm an interview coach. Yes. People pay me a lot of money because there's a job they want and they want to be the number one candidate that gets the offer. So my goal is always to get you to the offer. Whether or not you want that offer, that's not for me to decide. You hired me, you paid me, I'm going to help you get that offer. But and so I don't ever recommend, one of the really important things in an interview, and it has everything to do with fit and you showing your research and also likability, are the questions that you ask at the end when they say, do you have any questions for us? And I do not recommend asking questions that show that you're trying to figure out whether or not this job is for you, right? Tell me, what's the work-life balance? What's your PTO? No, don't ask any of that, because the minute you send a message, I'm not sure this job is for me, you have now taken yourself down a rung in that final round when it's who wants to work here the most, right? So you never want to send that message. At the same time, you don't want to act desperate. You always want it to be, I'm happy where I am, but this job is just so compelling for X, Y, and Z reasons. But when you ask questions at the end, there are things you can pay attention to in their answers that could be red flags and that you should notice as a red flag. And even as you're in the interview trying to be that number one candidate who gets the offer, you can still be paying attention to the red flags that tell you that you might not want to accept that offer. Red flags like the whole interview process is really chaotic, right? Highly disorganized. That's a big tell. What the culture is like. It's probably highly chaotic and highly disorganized, right? If you ask questions like, one of the big questions that you might want to ask is, what would success look like in this role? But let's get really specific about that, right? Specifically, what benchmarks of success would you want someone in this role to hit at, this particular period of time? And if it seems really unrealistic, if it seems like the expectations for the role are either unrealistic or they're really vague, like they can't tell you what that is, those are all big red flags. That they're not even sure what they need you to do, or their expectations are really unrealistic. So you do want to pay attention to that. But again, when you hire a career coach, their job is to make sure that you end up in the right job. My job as an interview coach is not to make sure you end up in the right job. My job as an interview coach is to teach you the communication skills to be able to land the offer in whatever interview you're going to. And then it's up to you whether or not you take that job.
Which is excellent feedback. And I think, being prepared for that interview and for those conversations, obviously, is a huge separator. When you get back into that conversation, I think a lot of people, and we're going to kind of return to our friend AI for a second here.
Sure.
A lot of people are preparing for an interview, right? By plugging this into AI. They're plugging the job description into AI, maybe the resume. What are they going to ask me in the process of this interview? What are they missing there?
So using AI to try to get a sense as to what are some questions you might get asked is a great idea. I would recommend making sure that you give whatever AI you're using the right information. Have it research the industry, have it research the company, tell it who you're interviewing with. Are you with a recruiter? Are you with a hiring manager? Are you with HR? Are you with a skip step? Like, let them know. If you have the name, give AI that name, let them research that person, and then ask the following questions. What is this interviewer's likely priorities for this candidate, given the job description that I've given you and all the research that you've done on the company and the industry and this person? And then AI will give you some really good points about messages that you had better prepare. You don't want to walk in not having prepared those messages. And then I would give it an anonymized version of a resume. And when I say anonymized, I mean taking off your name, your contact info, your email address. You don't need to give AI any of that.
Yeah, right.
And then ask it, given this candidate, what are the hiring manager's likely concerns going to be about this candidate? And pay attention, because those are the gaps that you might need to address in the interview. So I'm all for using AI for research. I'm a big fan of Perplexity over ChatGPT, just because I think Perplexity is better at research. But Claude can do a really good job with that too. With ChatGPT, whatever AI you use for research, you need to verify and confirm, check everything, because often the links are broken, or sometimes I'll check a link and it's not actually saying what it said, or it's a link that's not reliable. Like it's taking information from somewhere else that's really, really old. And AI is telling me this is new information, but really it's from 1976. So you always got to check, right?
Sure.
But using AI for that, here's what I would never use AI for. So when you're in an interview, I think the biggest mistake that people make in preparing for interviews is they think their job is to prepare answers, and it's not, right? If you are preparing for an interview by trying to make a list of every question they could give you and then writing out a whole bunch of scripts for how you're going to answer it, thinking that you're going to memorize and recite all those scripts, and it's going to sound like a natural conversation, you are setting yourself up to fail, right? So do not ask AI to tell you how to answer any interview question ever, for a number of reasons. First of all, AI is going to give you the most generic answer on the face of the planet, and that is not how you get to be the number one candidate. Getting to be the number one candidate is all about getting really specific about what it is you're good at and being able to articulate that with confidence and being able to prove it with success stories in a structured, concise way, right? So AI doesn't teach communication skills. So I would use AI to help you get a sense. One of the things I love to use AI for is I put in the job description and I ask it to take everything in that job description and give me 5 lists. What experience do they expect the candidate to have? What knowledge do they expect the candidate to know? What skills and abilities are they looking for in this candidate? And finally, where are the attitude words, right? I'm looking for entrepreneurial, motivated. Those are all attitude words that they shove into those job descriptions. And now you have an interview preparation rubric because you always want to start with what's in the job description. One of the mistakes I see a lot of candidates make is they read the job description, but like they have blinders on. They're noticing the things that they're good at and they're skipping over the things that they think they're not good at to kind of convince themselves that they can go. Listen, yes, talk about the things you're good at, but you have to remember everything they've said. You have to be ready to address those gaps if there are gaps. And you have to think through, this may not be a gap. I don't think of it as my strong point, but let me take an inventory of all the things I've done in that area so that I can make a compelling argument that it is a strength for me, right? So those are some of the ways I would use AI and not use AI.
I love the 5 lists. That's a brilliant idea. What a great way to be prepared. All right. What about, now we're running into situations, probably not now, but recently, where we've got a difference in perspective from a in-person interview versus online, right? So video conference.
Okay.
Is there a difference in preparation to get that final offer when you're talking about either one?
No, not really. I mean, again, interviews at their core are about 3 things. Value. Do you have the experience, knowledge, skills, ability, and attitude I'm looking for? Can you give me the results? Can you solve my problem? Can you create success? 2, fit. Are you going to be a good fit for the team? Are you motivated? Do you care about what we care about? Are you likely to stay? And then likability. And likability is some really specific things. Now, how you create relational presence, which is part of likability, in a virtual interview versus in person, that coaching might be a little bit different. But figuring out what your messages of value are for that particular role. What are the messages that I have to land to get this role? What are my priority messages? What's my fit proposition? All of that is the same, whether it's virtual or in person. I mean, when it comes to the likability piece, that's where obviously with an online interview, you have to pay attention to the signals that you may be giving with your background, the signals you may be giving with your ability with tech. If you're claiming to be tech savvy and you can't figure out how to get your microphone on, that's
yes.
or you can't figure out how to log in, or you're like this in the camera and half
you're
your
fading
face,
away. Yes.
Half your face is cut off. They're not going to believe that you're really, really good at tech.
Correct. Demonstrate the skill for sure, right?
Yeah.
That's fantastic. What about in terms of, I think that people tend to be comfortable with the one-to-one interview, right? All of a sudden they get the invite and they're walking into a panel. Yeah. And they're like, whoa. Yeah. How do I prepare for this?
And panels are everywhere now. Like you cannot expect to get hired without a panel interview. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And AI has a lot to do with it. But also there's really been a push. Interviews have changed a lot in the last 2 years, certainly since before COVID, and like crazy a lot since, the 2000s. And one of the ways in which it's changed that I think is a good thing is there's really a push to make it fairer and less subjective. There are some that would argue that AI is a way to make interviews less subjective because they use a standardized way. They have standardized scoring. I could talk for half an hour about the ways in which AI might make it more fair, but also the ways in which AI has bias. There's a lot of
Mhm.
evidence that they are biased against people who are neurodiverse because
Mhm.
some of them do look at body language and things like that. But everyone should expect to have a panel interview because this is a company's way of making it less subjective and more objective. If we have 6 people interviewing you or 8 people interviewing you, and we don't want it to take up so much time, and we got to move quickly because we don't want good candidates to go take a job somewhere else. So time is of the essence. So it makes a lot of sense to do an online panel interview, easy to schedule by sending everyone a link, and we can automate putting everyone's schedule together. However, the big coaching that we give people for creating a positive relational presence in a panel interview is to make contact with everyone on the panel. Hard to do in a virtual setting, right? So what can you do? I think the number one thing I would say for coaching and going into a panel interview, very often they will tell you ahead of time who is going to be in that panel. Do your research. Figure out who they are, figure out what their role is, so that when you are asked a question and when you're asking questions, if you can somehow in the course of that interview make clear that you know that Brad is HR and that Mary is, on the client side, and in the questions you ask, you're able to kind of refer like, I know Brad for HR, la, 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 but maybe Mary on the customer side might, and when you can do that and talk about them like, who they are on the team and what they do, that is the equivalent in a live interview of making eye contact with everybody. It's making everybody feel seen and feel heard. Even those, not everybody always speaks in a panel interview. I know many times companies try, but I often hear that there's like 1 or 2 people sometimes that just never say anything. You can still kind of acknowledge them. And if you don't know who they are ahead of time, they will introduce themselves to you in the beginning and take notes. Write that down. That's important information.
Yep. So a little cheat on those lines that I learned years ago is, especially in a panel in person, as they introduce, notate somehow that you know where that person's sitting. Yeah. So you have the name with the face pretty easily. Yeah. Same kind of thing with the online, where you can move the pictures around, the screens around, so that you're able to remember. Obviously, most of the time they'll have their name in the bottom of their screen, but if they don't, you want to make sure you have that. What about the close? How do you close this thing to make sure you've got it?
Okay. When you said what about the clothes, I thought we were about to talk about what to wear. So I'm just going
to
make a little shift. No,
we can do that too. We can go on.
I don't want to do that. That's not nearly as interesting as what about the close.
Yes.
Now, do you mean, just to clarify, what do you mean at the end do you mean the close of the interview, or do you mean that final round?
I mean, final round, you're one of 3, and this is your last few moments to make sure you've got that job. How are you closing this thing down?
Well, it's always going to be with questions, right? And very often the final round is going to be with somebody who's like a CEO, or it's the high level person who may only have 15 minutes for you, right? Or a half an hour for you, but less time. And you've got to make a big impression. And often by the time it gets there, the people below have kind of put in their 2 cents as to who it should be. And what that person's looking for is really very different. If it's a manager, they want to know, are you easy to manage? So one of the messages you want to deliver is, I'm going to make your job easier. I'm going to take things off your plate. Also, if you can get them talking with some really thoughtful questions, not the generic boilerplate questions that AI is going to give you, not a question. Your questions that you ask should be the kind of question that couldn't possibly be asked to anyone else in any other interview but that person in that interview. And the way you do that is you use your research. If that question could be asked to a different interviewer or at a different company, then it's not a great question. And my philosophy about the questions that you ask is they're going to fall into one of 3 categories, right? Every time you open your mouth in an interview, one of 3 things is going to happen. You're either going to help your candidacy, you're going to hurt your candidacy, or you are wasting an opportunity to help your candidacy. And the same is true when you ask questions. So a generic question may not hurt your candidacy, may not help your candidacy, but you're wasting an opportunity to help your candidacy. But a great, thoughtful question that that uses your research that couldn't possibly be asked in any other company to any other interviewer, that is getting you the information that you need to be able to be successful in that job, that's showing your real curiosity and your enthusiasm about the work that you're going to do. That kind of question is get them talking. And also, it's not just what you ask, it's how you respond when they respond to your question, right? So one of the big mistakes I see candidates make is they ask this great question. The interviewer gives this really thoughtful, wonderful answer, and the candidate goes, "Thanks. And here's my next question." It's like,
Yes.
no,
Yes.
have a conversation. What did they say that was interesting? What did you like about what they said? What was an aha for you in what they said? What got you excited in what they said? Ask another question. I often, if I have to, one of the things about live interviews versus virtual interviews is you have to worry about that small talk in the beginning, which you kind of don't have to do with virtual interviews. But there's always that awkward first small talk few minutes. And some people love it and some people are great at it. My husband happens to be like the champ at small talk, but some people need a little coaching, particularly new grads, people who've spent their lives in a screen rather than talking to people who are maybe neurodiverse. So the coaching that I often give is I want you to think of it like a little gentle ping pong game, right? You're not trying, this is not pickleball or tennis or squash. This is a little gentle ping pong game. And when they ask you a little simple question, like, did you have any trouble finding the building? They're serving you the ball. And if you just answer the question, you have let the ball drop. But if you answer the question and then ask them another little question, you have served the ball back. So, no, I had no trouble finding the building. Is the parking lot always so crowded on a Friday? Like, boom, you have sent the ball back. It doesn't matter what, just ask a little, show interest. Ask a little question back. Don't let the ball drop. And that same thing is true at the end when you're asking questions. Like, don't keep it going forever. Right. But when they respond, it's a great opportunity for you to land some messages in your response. If you've just asked them about, like, I saw in my research, you've got X initiative going on. What have been some of the biggest challenges for this team in implementing that? And they answer, oh, the challenges we faced are blah and blah and blah. And you just go, thank you, next question. No, let me tell you what I bring to those challenges. I'm excited to hear that those are the challenges because those are the kind of challenges I do great at, right? Like take the opportunity to land some messages of value.
It's always interesting that people struggle, I think, with the I in that situation in terms of telling their panel or their volley at that point, hey, I did this. I know what I'm doing here. And it seems as though maybe we faded a little bit more into a society that feels like it's got to be we. And it doesn't. And oftentimes in interviews, when you move from owning your accomplishments into making them a group, you watered yourself down.
You haven't just watered yourself down. You've literally erased yourself from that success, right? When they ask a behavioral, by the way, you have just stumbled onto my absolutely favorite thing to talk about ever. Because there is so much data and so many academic studies that have been done on this. There was one big study, Leadership IQ did a study in 2017, where they literally took 1,500 hiring managers and experts, and they had them analyze 25,000 interview answers and categorize them as to what would be a great hire, what would be a poor hire, what would be in between. And then they analyzed what was the difference between the answers where they said it would be a great hire and the answers where they said it would be a poor hire. And the difference was I language. Yep. That the answers that used I were great hires, and the ones that used we or you didn't. And let me tell you what this looks like in practice. So I'm sure most of your listeners know about what a STAR scenario is, right? There's a lot of different narrative frameworks you can use for a success story in an interview. There's STAR, there's 5 million variations of STAR. There's also other frameworks that are more appropriate for senior levels where STAR may fall a little short, but let's talk about STAR for a moment. So you're in there and you're setting up, you've been asked a question, tell me about a time you demonstrated some capacity, some competency, and now you're going to give them a STAR scenario. And they're listening for, are you good at this, right? Most people spend way too much time on the situation and the task and setting up the picture. And then they get to what they actually did, and it's we
Yep.
did this, we did this, we did this. Well, they're not interviewing the team. You've just taken your one opportunity to show them what you can do, and you haven't. You have taken yourself out. So they have no idea at the end of that story, even with your fabulous successful result, what you've said in essence is, here was this big problem we had. Here's what the team did. Here was the successful result. And I hope you can infer that I had something to do with that. No, when you get to the action, you need to say what you did. And I'm not saying, listen, it can come off as really arrogant and cocky to take credit for something that clearly was a team effort. But you really, and this is where the preparation comes in. You have to think about, what did I contribute to the team? How did I make a difference on the team that made that result, that successful result, happen, right? And a lot of the studies that have been done actually have shown that women are much less likely than men to use I, and are much more likely than men to couch their achievements in terms of teamwork. And that in turn creates a perception, not a reality, but a perception that women are less confident in interviews, right? That when you use we and you language as opposed to I language, it comes off as less confident, even if you might be confident. I'm not saying they are less confident. I'm saying that's what the perception is. And we all know that the perception of confidence in an interview matters, right? It matters. There's a ton of data around that too, that the perception of confidence influences hiring decisions, influences whether or not you get another round of interviews, can even influence how much money you're being offered when you're given the offer. So that one little change, getting comfortable with saying, I'm really good at this in whatever way, like we don't, people are afraid of sounding cocky or arrogant. I'm like, cocky or arrogant is overinflated, generalized, I'm great at everything. But when you can get really specific about what your strengths are, like, listen, one of my strengths is giving engaging presentations, or I really take pride in my thorough and accurate research. Like, when you can be really specific about what it is you're good at, that's the kind of I language that says to them, this is someone who can do the things that we're looking for, and also gives the appearance of confidence.
And can lead that function as well in terms of that exercise. If it's we, you're not leading. You're looking for the people next to you to walk with. So
well, leadership's a whole other is a whole other thing. If you're trying to show leadership, you need to use I about the decisions that you've made. But talking about what you led the team to do and giving credit for the team can be a very desirable quality in a leader in its place. But when someone's going for a leadership position and all they do is talk about execution, which is the problem with STAR, right? Because it's situation, task, actions, result, what I did, what I executed. In leadership positions, particularly senior level leadership positions, they're not looking for execution. They don't want someone who executes strategy. Right. They want to know, how do you set strategy, right? How do you drive strategy? So a whole other kind of storytelling is a little bit more appropriate, where you talk about, what were the stakes? What were the trade-offs that you had to look at? And what decisions did you make? What was your judgment? And how did your decisions impact the company? And what would have happened if you had made a different decision? So it's a different kind of storytelling.
Yeah, but very true. So in terms of, how this all comes together, obviously you're working with individuals who are like, this is my dream job. I want this job. And I need to get there. And supporting that. Let me ask you the same question I ask all guests. And it's my favorite question to ask, because I find it so interesting how people get to these places in their careers. What is your why? Why do you do this?
I love that question. I love what I do. And the reason why I love what I do is because I believe, and I believe this because I have seen it, that interview skills, the communication skills to be able to interview successfully, those skills have the power to completely change careers and completely transform people's lives, right? Because when you are able to level up your career, that impacts your whole life. And I also believe, because I have seen it, that just about everybody has the capacity to learn those skills. It is not rocket science. It is a set of skills that very few places teach. Almost no college career counseling centers teach these skills. There have been a few business schools that teach these skills. I've seen a few law schools that teach these skills, but the skill of strategic messaging as opposed to writing out and memorizing and reciting scripts, right? It's skills like driving a car, right? Like there is no teenager in this country that the night before their road test went to their parents and said, can you give me some tips? I've got my road test tomorrow. They knew they had to start a long time before. They had to get behind the wheel of the car. They need to learn the skills to drive. They had to practice those skills. Same if you want to play the guitar, same if you want to play soccer. These are skills, and communication skills are skills. They can be learned, they can be taught, and they are absolutely transformational. And that's why I do what I do, because I love seeing how learning a set of skills that I teach people in 3 sessions can completely transform their lives.
That's amazing. I love that. And I love the fact that you are clearly so passionate about helping people get to that point. And really believing in your clients and their ability to get there. So I really enjoyed our time today. And I certainly think that the audience that's out there that is at a point where they're struggling with, how do I get ready for this interview? This is my dream job. How do I land this position? Or even the folks that are out there that are like, hey, I've been interviewing, nothing's happening. Yeah. I'm getting through the front end of this thing. I'm getting through AI. I'm getting through screening. Nothing's happening. How do they reach you?
A couple of different ways. My website is impressiveinterviewing.com, and you can always find me on my website. You can contact me through my website. I'm on TikTok. You can join the 70,000 other people who follow me on TikTok for interview tips, and I'm at Your Interview Coach. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, which is my name, Lili Foggle, Lilifoggle. And if you want to become an interview coach, if you think that you want to teach people how to do what I do, you can sign up for the Certified Interview Coach program.
All right, recruiters out there, you hear that? Step on up to the microphone. So, folks, if there's somebody out there that you know that you think will be helped by this podcast today, please share it with them. If this has been information that's been helpful to you, there's pieces of it that you're like, man, I didn't know that. Go ahead and give us 5 stars. Please subscribe to the podcast as well. And Lili, thank you again for joining us today. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks,
Kevin.